There's something happening right now that almost nobody's noticing. No headlines, no loud debates, no protests in the streets, just a quiet, steady disappearance. More and more people, thoughtful people, sensitive people, deeply self-aware people, are slowly pulling away from the noise of the world. They're stepping off the treadmill of endless opinions, drama, and performance, leaving behind careers that no longer feel meaningful, closing social media accounts, ending relationships that feel hollow, choosing solitude over the constant chatter of society. And here's the thing, it's not coming from bitterness, it's not rebellion, it's not even cynicism, it's something deeper. They're not slamming doors on the way out, they're simply disappearing, slipping quietly into the background, choosing silence, stillness, and distance over the chaos of collective life. And here's the strange part. If you ask them why, most can't give you a neat, polished answer. They'll just tell you it feels like something inside them refuses to play along anymore, that participating in the usual games of society feels unbearable now, not uncomfortable, not annoying, but unbearable. Almost like staying plugged into the noise is slowly poisoning something in them. And if you've felt this yourself, if you've ever looked at your phone, your schedule, your social calendar, and thought, I can't keep doing this, you're not alone. This is happening everywhere, to thousands of people at once. And it's not random, it's not weakness. In fact, some of the greatest thinkers of the last century predicted it. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, wrote about something he called the necessary withdrawal. It's what happens when someone becomes so psychologically awake, so aware of themselves and the unconscious patterns driving the world, that staying plugged into the collective noise becomes impossible, not difficult, not stressful, impossible, like your whole body, your whole soul begins saying no more. It's not that you suddenly hate people, it's that the way society runs, the endless distractions, the shallow conversations, the constant pretending, feels like sandpaper on your mind. Jung believed this wasn't a failure of the individual, it was a survival mechanism of the psyche itself, that when someone wakes up enough, when they really start to see through the illusions holding everything together, they have to step back. Not forever, not to escape life, but to protect the very thing they've discovered, their own consciousness. And maybe you've felt this too, that pressure building inside you, that sense of, I can't keep living like this. You can't scroll endlessly anymore without feeling sick. You can't play along with small talk without feeling false. You can't chase the things you're supposed to chase without feeling empty. It's like your soul refuses to participate in the same way it once did. You can try to ignore it for a while, bury yourself in work, numb yourself with distractions, but the pressure keeps building until one day something in you breaks, and instead of snapping outward in anger, you snap inward, you retreat, not because you've given up, but because some deep instinct knows you have to, that something inside you is trying to survive. Jung believed this inner withdrawal isn't the end of your journey, it's the beginning of a deeper one, because the moment you wake up to how unconscious the world really is, the moment you truly see it, you can't unsee it, and that changes everything. Stop handing over your hard-earned awareness to a world built on unconsciousness. Carl Jung discovered something unsettling. As you integrate your own shadow, your fears, your darkness, the parts of yourself you once denied, the collective shadow of society becomes almost unbearable to watch, because suddenly you see it everywhere. You start noticing that most people aren't dealing with their darkness. They're projecting it, throwing it outward onto convenient scapegoats. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you've confronted your own capacity for destruction, anger, and envy, when you've admitted those forces live in you, watching an entire culture deny its shadow while flinging blame outward becomes excruciating. It starts looking less like ordinary social life and more like a psychological fever dream, because that's what it is: mass projection, collective unconsciousness, acting itself out in real time. This is what Jung called the burden of seeing. The more conscious you become, the clearer it is. Political debates? Mostly two sides hurling their rejected darkness at each other while claiming moral purity. Social media outrage? a round-the-clock shadow carnival, each post begging for a villain to absorb the hate no one wants to face in themselves. Culture wars? Just masks and mirrors, every side convinced it's the only one not wearing one. And when you see this clearly, participation becomes impossible. You can't cheer for the mob when you see it's just people hunting their own shadow. You can't rage against the other side when you realize both sides are made of the same disowned darkness. You can't join the shouting match when you know the argument itself is a cover for something deeper. It's not that you stop caring, it's that you start seeing too much to play along. One of Jung's students put it perfectly. I used to have strong political opinions. Then I confronted my shadow, and I realized my opinions were just projections dressed up as truth. Now, when he watched two groups fighting, he didn't see heroes and villains anymore. He saw two sets of people, both possessed by their unconsciousness, both convinced they were righteous. To join in would feel like signing up for mass psychosis. So he didn't, not because he thought he was above it all, but because he literally couldn't participate anymore without betraying his own awareness. Here's what's really happening when people awaken. They're not just seeing the collective shadow intellectually, they're feeling it. Awareness heightens your sensitivity. The noise, the blame, the projection, it stops being background static and starts feeling like psychological violence. It's not moral judgment, it's energetic incompatibility. The more conscious you become, the heavier unconsciousness feels on your body, your mind, your soul. Jung experienced this himself. After his own deep psychological transformation, he found being in large groups almost unbearable. Not because he disliked people, but because he could feel the unconscious currents swirling around him. Every projection, every repression, every unspoken shadow. It was like standing in the middle of a storm no one else could see. And this is why awakened people often disappear from social media first, because social media is basically a 24/7 projection factory. Every scroll delivers another blast of collective shadow material. Every comment section turns into a shadow boxing ring where no one realizes they're punching themselves. For someone who's done real inner work, who's faced their own darkness, it's like watching people injure themselves over and over, convinced someone else is causing the pain. It's exhausting, and at some point the psyche says, enough. Because here's Jung's second insight. The moment you move toward your authentic self, once you've stopped living as a mask, the performance society demands from you becomes unbearable. And modern life, it runs almost entirely on performance. But once you taste realness, the endless pretending feels like slow death. Before awakening, life feels manageable. You can smile when you're supposed to. You can nod politely at opinions you secretly disagree with. You can show up at work or family gatherings and wear the right mask for the occasion. You might even mistake this for being a good person, because that's what the world teaches us. Play your role well, stay agreeable, and everything will be fine. But something changes the moment you touch the deeper, authentic self, that quiet center beyond all masks, all roles, all expectations. Once you've felt that, once you've tasted the relief of being real, going back to the performance feels like self-betrayal, like slow psychological death. Because here's the truth, almost every space in modern life runs on performance. At work, you're expected to be the confident, polished professional. At family dinners, you're the dutiful son, daughter, parent, or sibling. On social media, you curate the perfect identity, one post at a time. In public, you wear the mask of acceptable opinions, emotions, and beliefs. To most people, this feels normal. They don't even notice they're performing because the persona is all they've ever known. But to someone who's glimpsed their authentic self, this constant acting feels unbearable. It's like trying to squeeze back into clothes you've outgrown. Carl Jung experienced this himself. After his deep confrontation with the unconscious, after his own awakening, he found he simply couldn't play the game anymore. He couldn't smile and nod at ideas he knew were false. He couldn't keep up friendships built on pretending. He couldn't tolerate the mask of the respectable Swiss psychiatrist when his soul demanded something real. So he withdrew. Not out of arrogance, not out of rebellion, but because the environment he once fit into no longer fit him. He built a small stone tower by the lake in Bollingen, a place where he could finally be himself without the noise of expectations pressing in. This wasn't antisocial behavior, it was pro-authenticity. The awakened person doesn't leave because they hate people, they leave because they can't lie to themselves anymore. They've become too real for spaces that only accept fragments, too whole for rooms that demand masks, too alive for systems built on dead routines. I remember reading about one of Jung's patients, a high-powered executive who went through this exact transformation. She said, "I sit in board meetings and everyone's performing, speaking the way executives are supposed to speak, thinking the way executives are supposed to think, and I realized my authentic self has no voice in that room, only my persona does. And it's gone. I can't resurrect it, just to play along." She didn't storm out dramatically. She didn't flip the table and quit in anger. She simply stopped belonging there. Over a few months, she transitioned out quietly, moved to a small town and began living a slower, more honest life. Not because she failed at success, but because she succeeded at finding herself. This is happening everywhere. People leaving careers that require constant performance. People ending relationships where only their mask was loved, not their true self. People disappearing from social circles that demand the right opinions and emotions on command. It's not collapse, it's not defeat, it's evolution. Because here's what Jung understood. The more authentic you become, the less you can survive in systems that demand you be fake. It's not a choice anymore, it's an energetic reality. Here's what most people don't see about awakening. Maintaining consciousness inside an unconscious environment comes at a staggering cost. It drains you. It wears you down in ways you can't even explain to others because they don't feel it. Jung understood this well. He called it psychological labor, the invisible work required just to exist in spaces where everyone else is running on autopilot. And it is work, real, measurable, exhausting work. Think about what the conscious person has to do in a normal day, filtering out the projections flying at them from every direction, setting boundaries with people who don't even know they're crossing them, translating between depth and surface so conversations don't feel alien, holding their emotional center while surrounded by chaos, processing their own inner world and the unconscious energy everyone else is spilling into the room. It's like carrying two backpacks through life, yours and everyone else's, and no one can see the second one but you. For people still living unconsciously, this doesn't feel like work at all. They swim with the current, they flow with the collective energy because it matches their own. But for the awakened, every interaction becomes like swimming upstream in a river of noise, or worse, like trying to stay afloat in a tsunami that never stops coming. Jung noticed this in his own life and in his patients. The most conscious ones often came to him exhausted, burned out, or even physically ill, not because something was wrong with them psychologically, but because staying awake in a world that runs on sleep is brutal. It wears down your nervous system, it frays your boundaries, it leaves you feeling raw and overexposed. I remember reading about one woman, a teacher, who spent years doing deep inner work. She became more self-aware, more conscious, more present than ever before. But as she taught day after day, surrounded by colleagues and students operating unconsciously, she began to break down. Severe chronic fatigue set in. Her body felt heavy all the time. Doctors ran every test. Nothing came back abnormal. It wasn't her body that was sick. It was her energy that was spent. Through analysis with Jung, she realized the truth. She was expending massive psychological energy just holding herself together in that environment. Every day, she was processing the projections, the drama, the unconscious emotional static surrounding her, and it was killing her spirit. When she finally left teaching and moved into a small cabin in nature, her health returned within weeks. Not because she rested more, but because she was no longer burning through her energy to stay conscious in a place drowning in unconsciousness. And this is the pattern Jung saw everywhere: awakened people disappearing into nature, withdrawing into solitude, finding small, conscious communities far from the noise, not because they're lazy, not because they're running away from responsibility, but because they understand something simple and profound. Consciousness is precious, and pouring it into unconscious systems is like pouring water into sand. No matter how much you give, it never fills. Jung believed this wasn't just personal, it was archetypal. He called it the hermit phase of individuation. Not permanent, but necessary. Every person on the path toward wholeness eventually has to step away, not forever, not to escape life, but to let the psyche integrate without being torn apart by the world's unconsciousness. Because when you're transforming at the deepest level, you need silence to hear yourself. You need space to break old patterns. You need solitude to become whole. It's not misanthropy, it's psychological necessity. Jung himself knew what it meant to disappear. Those long stretches he spent at his retreat in Bollingen weren't vacations. They weren't escapes from responsibility. They were psychological survival. He needed distance from the constant hum of collective consciousness so he could finally hear his own. He needed separation from the roles people expected him to play so he could discover the deeper self beneath the roles. And this is exactly what's happening to awakening people today. They're not vanishing because they're fragile or antisocial. They're following the same archetypal pattern Jung described, the hermit phase. The hermit phase is where the real work happens. It's where the shadow integrates without the world demanding you hide it. It's where the authentic self emerges without needing to perform for anyone. It's where wisdom grows roots without being drowned out by the noise of other people's opinions. Psychological transformation doesn't happen in crowded rooms. It happens in silence, in solitude, in the spaces where no one is asking you to be anything other than real. But here's what Jung wanted people to understand. The hermit phase isn't about running away from life. It's not retreat as defeat. It's retreat as preparation, because the awakened person withdraws to develop something the world actually needs but can't yet recognize. One of Jung's students, a philosopher, did exactly this. He disappeared from academic life for 3 years. No lectures, no publications, no conferences. Colleagues whispered that he must have had a breakdown, but he hadn't. He'd had a breakthrough because in the silence of those years, he integrated insights that would have been impossible while performing as the respected philosopher. When he finally returned, he brought ideas that changed the field forever. Ideas that needed the soil of solitude to grow. That's the paradox of the hermit phase. From the outside, it looks like retreat, but on the inside, it's a deepening. The awakened person isn't running away from the world. They're descending beneath it, into layers of self and psyche that can't be reached when you're constantly performing for an audience. They're doing work society doesn't have the patience or depth to understand, the work that can only happen away from the spotlight. And this leads to Jung's final insight, the one people often miss. The awakened don't stay gone forever, but when they return differently. Not to be swallowed up again by the unconsciousness they left behind. Not to blend back into the roles and games they've outgrown. They return carrying something new, a kind of depth, clarity, or wisdom that only solitude could have given them. Jung compared them to what he called border dwellers, people who live at the edges of society, present but not absorbed, engaged but not entangled. They don't come back to preach to the masses or fight the collective unconscious head-on. Instead, they offer what they've found to the ones ready to hear it. The artist creating from authentic depth. The healer guiding individuals through their own shadow work. The teacher sharing insights with small groups of seekers. The writer leaving maps for other disappearing souls. They don't return to normal life because they no longer fit into the old molds. They return to help others break free from them. And here's the part few people understand. Those who disappear rarely return to the mainstream. They can't, because once you've crossed that threshold, once you've experienced what Jung called individuation, you can't de-individuate. You can't go back to wearing the mask after you've felt your real face. You can't pretend unconsciousness after you've seen the machinery running beneath everything. You can't force yourself back into roles that feel too small for the self you've now discovered. Jung watched this pattern unfold again and again. His patients, who fully awakened, didn't return to the lives they left behind. They built new ones, simpler, quieter, more authentic, lives where they could give without losing themselves, lives where contribution didn't come at the cost of consciousness. One of his patients, a therapist, vanished for 2 years after a spiritual crisis shook her entire identity. When she re-emerged, she didn't reopen her old practice. She began working only with people going through spiritual emergency, the kind of transformation she had survived herself. Her practice was tiny but powerful, invisible to the mainstream, but life-changing to those who found her. She no longer fit the world she'd left. She was creating a new one, quietly, on the margins. And that's the model Jung saw again and again. Awakened people don't come back to the center of mass culture. They form conscious edges, pockets of depth, parallel spaces that the collective doesn't notice, at least not yet. Jung believed this wasn't regression. It was evolution in real time, because not everyone awakens at once. The pioneers go first, they disappear, they create new ways of living, and only later, when the collective is ready, do others follow the path they carved out. From the outside, this disappearance looks like abandonment. Where did the wise voices go? Why do the most conscious people leave when the world needs them the most? But Jung would say, they're not abandoning the world. They're preparing something for it. They're creating sanctuaries for those beginning the same journey, spaces where consciousness can breathe without suffocating under performance and noise, places where future seekers will find what they couldn't find in the mainstream. So if you're feeling that pull to withdraw, Jung would tell you, this isn't weakness, this isn't failure, this isn't escapism. It's the psyche saying, it's time to deepen. Your consciousness has grown beyond the limits of the collective container. The roles you used to play now feel too small. The conversations that once felt normal now feel hollow. The constant noise of performance, persona, and projection feels unbearable because it is unbearable for someone who's woken up. So withdraw. Not forever, but for now. Find your own Bollingen. Whether it's a cabin in the woods, a season of solitude, or simply psychological distance from the noise. Stop translating your depth into surface language for people who can't hear it. Stop leaking your energy into systems that only demand masks. Stop betraying the self you fought so hard to find. Because the world doesn't need more people who half participate unconsciously. It needs people who've gone all the way through the fire, who've returned whole, authentic, unshaken, people who can offer depth because they refused to keep living at the surface. When you come back, if you come back, it won't be to the same roles you left behind. You'll return with gift you couldn't have developed while pretending to belong. You'll speak truths you couldn't have spoken while maintaining the old performance. The spiritually awake are disappearing because disappearance is part of awakening, not from hatred of the world, but from love of what's real. Love that says, I must become whole, even if it means being alone. Jung would tell you, disappear consciously, withdraw with purpose, use solitude as integration, not isolation, because you're not abandoning the collective, you're pioneering what it will one day need. If you're feeling this pull to disappear, you're not alone. This channel is here for people walking the individuation path. Watch the video on your screen now about the hermit archetype and how to use solitude for transformation instead of escape, because your disappearance isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of becoming the person the world quietly hopes you will be.